Hello, everyone. Very good morning to all of you. In this brief 30-minute talk, I would like to talk about the opportunities that the COVID crisis gives us in terms of how we should rethink our strategies for science R&D. In a recent rather important article, Gautam Chikkarmane, the Vice President of the Observer Research Foundation, Delhi, he calls COVID a perfect storm for deep reform. And he defines three events in the history of India that have resulted in a qualitative change in our policy and changes of basically an irreversible type. The first one he calls the liberalization or economy moment in 1991, when we had to change our complete economic system. The political or geostrategic moment he defines as Balakot, and then the legal constitutional moment he defines as the abrogation of Article 370. In all these cases, there were many smaller events that led up to this point. These things, liberalization or Balakot or 370, did not happen suddenly. There were lots of things happening. And things came to such a pass that without taking a drastic step at that moment, the country would have been in serious trouble. Now, many of us today are looking at the Mahabharata on Doordarshan. And I think that all these moments, the economy moment, the political moment, and the constitutional moment, can all be called by a single word, Shishupala moment. So for those of you, I know a few of you are listening from abroad. Shishupala was this guy who was allowed to commit 100 sins before the divine discus came flying at his neck and chopped it off. So he was allowed 100 sins, but when he committed the 101st sin, his neck was chopped off. So the sins that led up to the economy moment was an unnecessary love affair with socialism for many years. The events that led up to Balakot again was an unnecessary infatuation with an unfriendly neighbor. And the things that led to abrogation of 370 had more to do with the fact that there was a small political group in Kashmir who was playing games both with the people of Kashmir and with the politicians in Delhi. So again, things came to a pass where no other thing was possible. This is not an Indian phenomenon. I mean, if you look at the, Shishupala moments have happened in world history. If you look at the events that led up to World War II, I mean, Hitler swallowed Saarland and then Rhineland, then he swallowed Austria, and then he swallowed Czechoslovakia, and everybody kept quiet. And then the Shishupala moment came when he swallowed Poland. And at that point of time, World War II began and there were irreversible changes in the world. Another good example is the Yom Kippur War. Everybody knew when Israel was founded that Palestine had a problem. But unlike Hitler's sins of commission, these were sins of omission committed by the great powers of the West. They did not find a proper solution to the Middle East problem. And then Israel was forced to go for the Yom Kippur war. And this led to serious economic downturns in 1973, when the cartel of oil producing nations started a boycott of countries they felt had favored Israel. In the case of COVID, it was, I don't know whether to call it sins of omission or commission, but all of us were having a wonderful time in the years that led up to COVID. What do I mean by this? Didn't we all have great fun in buying a made in China t-shirt for 100 rupees when we could have bought a much better quality t-shirt made in Tirupur or Ludhiana for 400 rupees? After COVID came, we realized that we have paid a very high price to buy that 100 rupee t-shirt. It was a very, very expensive t-shirt that we bought. And so you see, the COVID moment, will we see a Shishupala moment for science? Before we get to answer this question, I should tell you a little bit about how science has been done in India for the last 70 years. Essentially, it was a single silo thing. Science was being administered largely by scientists, and let's say briefly, it was largely funded by the government. The government funding was small, but it was there. Then the idea was to do something to the best of one's abilities, and then to hope for the best based on the limited inputs that we were getting in terms of money. Now, naturally, with this kind of a thing, weak funding, do something as best as you can and then hope for the best, the results are bound to be disappointing. One cannot blame scientists for the lack of tangible or quantifiable or really earth-shaking outputs. Once again, it is more sins of omission. If you look at the main organizations that do science in India, you find that there is a great vagueness and uncertainty in terms of the relationship between teaching and research in these places. We have the state universities, which handle the largest number of students but have almost no funding. Then we have central universities which have a little more funding. And then we have the IITs, which cater to two entirely different groups of students, the BTechs and the MScs. And then the spin-off from the IITs were the IISERs, that are still too new to pass judgment on. Then we have the CSIR system, which correctly belongs neither to the academic world or to the industrial world, but is supposed to bridge both of them. And then we have the strange phenomenon of government departments running scientific institutions, the DST institutions, DBT, DAE, ICMR. People have asked, should government run an airline? Should government run hotels? I will ask, should a government department run scientific institutions? If you look at many of these institutions, there is very, very little to distinguish them from universities. True, the amount of teaching is greater or lesser, but by and large, all these institutions are somewhat the same. They are paper oriented. The translation to industry is rather weak, and there is no clear definition about the teaching and research responsibilities of each of these places. And then came COVID. The single silo approach to science is now impossible, because all the three moments described by Chickermane, economy moment, political moment and constitutional moment, are now going to affect science. Science cannot be treated independently from the economy, from geopolitics, and from the constitution. There are going to be huge money cuts. In the first quarter of the present financial year, we have seen a 40% cut in the outlay for education and science, except health research, which is a separate category. And considering that the salary and pension budget is almost 55% of the whole kitty, this leaves very, very little to do any kind of research. Geostrategy is going to be very important. If you, for example, consider that because of COVID, countries are going to become isolationist. They are going to draw into themselves. Yesterday I saw a very nice, I felt it's a very nice development, that the top IITs have said that they don't want to participate in some of the international rankings for world universities because we've never figured with a high rank in these places. And China always seems to get in there with a very large number of cases. And I'm glad that we decided to come out, because India has reached the stage when it should no longer look for unbridled support from Western academic institutions. The giants of Indian science yesteryear, Acharya J.C. Bose, C.V. Raman, J.C. Ghosh, G.N. Ramachandran, did not care for approval from the West. They got it, that's another matter, but they did not care for it. And that is a great difference between the real champions, the real pioneers, and today's heroes. And finally, when you talk about strategic interests, countries getting isolated, I'll give you an example, two examples actually. The first concerns big data. We have companies like Alibaba from China. We don't have a similar thing from India. We are supposed to be software champs of the world, but we only seem to be doing, backroom work. It was easily possible that we produce something like WhatsApp or Facebook. Nothing in the Indian intellect or drive or ambition prevents us from doing that. What has prevented us from doing that is what the government could have done but did not do. Give us the encouragement. The other thing is pharma. Till 1990, we were doing pretty well in making pharmaceutical compounds in India because of the liberal policies that the government of India adopted between 1970 and 1990. Basically, what Mrs. Gandhi did was she scrapped our adherence to the international patent system and told Indian scientists, you go ahead and make these compounds. We'll not worry about international patents. So we developed great expertise in making these compounds. By 1990, however, the Chinese imports they started flooding the market and they became cheaper. So to get a drug from China is about 10 to 20% cheaper than making it in India. Now at this point of time, if the government of India had encouraged the pharma industry and made up that balance, today we wouldn't be in a problem. How many of you know, for example, that some of the most common medicines that Indians take for type 2 diabetes, hypertension, cardiovascular disease, malaria, tuberculosis, essential raw materials are still imported from China? We're very good at formulation. We take these things, we make them into tablets, we give the tablets nice colors, sometimes a nice taste. But finally the raw material is coming from China. Please do not forget that. Today, it may hurt the Chinese market to deny us those imports, but tomorrow post-COVID, they may decide that they will pay that sum and deny us those imports. Then where do we go? We have 70 million type 2 diabetics and probably 150 million hypertensives in this country. Where will all these people go? The government has to come in and walk that extra mile to facilitate the pharmaceutical industry, one of our good industries for all that. And this is where the strategic interest must come in. There must be a strategic component in much of the research that is going on. And for instance, this is a good opportunity to say that the government should then concern itself with only those institutions that do strategic science. For example, CSIR, instead of masquerading as an academic institution, can start taking up strategic science only. CSIR has the expertise. It's not that they don't. Some of our best scientists in the country work in CSIR labs. If the government gives them that encouragement and tells them that they can be gainfully employed in strategic work, then a great deal would be achieved. Let's go to the legal and constitutional aspects. Now, the economic aspects and the strategic aspects, let me tell you, many of the problems there can be solved with executive orders or simple laws that can be passed in Parliament without touching the Constitution. It is only a matter of government will. When you come to certain other issues, however, mostly to do with the education sector, the Constitution comes in. I will talk about two of these issues, if I have time, briefly towards the end of my talk. But the two most important constitutional issues that we will have to look at is whether education should belong to the central list or to the state list or to the concurrent list where it belongs today. These are very serious questions because there are plus points and minus points of having education in one of these three categories. Let's not forget that in 1947, education was in the state list. And under very controversial circumstances, Mrs. Gandhi pushed education into the concurrent list during the emergency time. So, this brings me to the point of, again, economy everywhere. We have lived in a scarcity economy. And in such a scarcity economy, the accent is more on how to exclude people rather than how to include people. We have the culture of a single exam, a single selection and a single award. If you pass a single exam, namely the IIT Joint Entrance Exam or the CSIR UGC NET exam, then you are in. If you don't pass this exam, you are out. A single selection for a job. If you clear that selection, you are in for 30 to 35 to 40 years. If you don't clear that selection, you are out forever. A single award, say the Bhatnagar Prize. If you get it, then you are in. If you don't get it, you are out. So in such a scenario where you have a single exam, single selection, single award system, it would be okay if these things were administered extremely honestly. Then you would get honest people at the end. But even if any of these is slightly compromised, you have a system where people without quality come to a position of great power and privilege, no accountability, very high salaries, total job security, benefits till death. Now, in India we have this, certainly, we don't have a word, really a good word for God in the Hindu religion, but we have devas, who are mortal people who have extraordinary qualities. So we have lots of devas, political devatas, executive devatas, judicial devatas. So we have a large number of science devatas who are roaming around today, the demigods. And Chikarmane correctly calls this phenomenon the capture of institutions. So an institution is captured by these demigods, and at that point of time, no further progress is possible. The capture of institutions by substandard people leads to a loss of quality. And this loss of quality is permanent and debilitating. Because you see, in science, getting good science is not like building bridges or making roads, because in those cases you put in the money and you will see the result quickly. For science, once you put in the money, you will see the result only after 15 years. There is no point the government telling all the labs, come on, let's see what you can do with COVID. See, we had to be prepared to deal with a virus. Countries like the USA and China have been working on virus research for 15 years, ever since the SARS problem came to the world. It's unfair to expect Indian scientists to come up with a wonderful remedy for COVID within 20 days. It's simply not possible. And so, as I reach the end of my talk, how is this Shishupala moment going to work itself out in science? The main point is there's no money. When there's no money, you can't indulge yourself in your various emotional fancies. If you don't have money, you can't indulge yourself, for example, in reservations. We have a state that I shall not name, which today has 119% reservations. Now, with the reservations for economically backward people, this number may go to 129% reservations. So what does this mean in practical terms? It means that you have to admit 129 students with the money that you would normally use for 100 students. Where is this money going to come from? It cannot come from the government, because government doesn't have that money. And in general, where is the money going to come from for our entire activity? I mean, the budget of Yale University last year was $3.4 billion. This is equal to 28 or 29,000 crores. And even if you convert it into PPP dollars, you get about, as I said, 7 to 8,000 crore rupees, which is more than the budget of DST. So one university is more than a whole government department. So clearly there is no money. The money cannot come from the government. It cannot be business as usual. The money must come from industry, from startups. The government has to encourage startups vigorously and not put 100 bureaucratic objections for a startup to take off. Many startups crash, they vanish. But we do have the kind of expertise, managerial expertise, to do these startups, and the money obviously has to come from there. We need a complete restructuring of the system. And for example, we must begin a discussion on reservations. We cannot avoid it. And here again, let me say that there is one type of reservation that we must continue with, and those are the reservations for the scheduled caste, scheduled tribe people. Because they have suffered from social stigmas, and giving them college seats is not enough. The greatest reformer of modern India, Swami Vivekananda, put this very succinctly. He said, giving someone knowledge without prestige is as bad as not giving the knowledge at all. And which is why I find this whole argument of creamy layers and so on wrong for scheduled caste, scheduled tribe people. Because you can have that knowledge, you can impart that knowledge through the courses or the classwork or research or whatever. But if that person doesn't have social prestige in his place of work, then it is no good. And this social prestige cannot come strictly from higher education. It must come in at the primary levels. So one of the things that government can seriously think about is to have very carefully controlled reservations in the primary state and start phasing out these reservations as you go higher and higher in the research ladder. Now this scheduled caste, scheduled tribe reservation is a must. We cannot stop it right now. All other kinds of reservations, mind you, are political necessities. OBC, MBC, Jat, Maratha, Patil, Muslims, Christians. This entire business of minority educational institutions needs to be looked at. Minority educational institutions make sense if the education being imparted is of a religious nature, not for teaching physics and chemistry. And once again, the rest of the reservations are all politically motivated. They capture vote banks and this and that and so on. So all this has to be looked at, and this is where the judicial part comes in. A very serious discussion must start, because once again, I am saying no to the other kinds of reservations. Mind you, not for SC/ST where you need it. But for the other kinds of reservations, we simply can't afford it. We don't have the money for 129 seats in a class of 100. Simple, plain and simple. In the end, as I come to the end, let me say, we have to look at excellence, equity and economy all together. And once again, let me say that this country cannot progress because Kashmiris feel emotionally happy in Kashmir, or Maharashtrians feel emotionally happy in Maharashtra, or whether Tamilians feel emotionally happy in Tamil Nadu, or whether Bengalis feel emotionally happy in Bengal. Emotion is something you can afford when you have a lot of money. And we don't have the money to have deep held emotions right now. Not in the education sector, not in the science sector. And to get the money, the surest, cleanest, most efficient way of getting money is to allow science and technology to flourish. The Western countries have shown us that it is only because of S&T that the West took an advance over the rest of the world. And the only way to facilitate S&T in science is to facilitate the education system. So education is all important, and it is a slow investment. The very last point I'll say is that today the most important ministerial committee in the cabinet is chaired by the Prime Minister, and it has the Minister of Home, Finance, External Affairs and Defence. There is a very strong case to bring in the Minister for Health and the Minister for Education into this group of vital ministries. If your education is not proper, your science and technology will not be proper. And unless your education is proper, any good work done by the Home Ministry, the Finance Ministry, the Defence Ministry or the External Affairs Ministry will all be pretty much useless. Education has been neglected in a profound way in our country. And this, I believe, is the Shishupala moment for all of us in S&T to get together, work as a whole country and put science and technology in the proper place, so that the vision of J.N. Tata, Swami Vivekananda and Acharya J.C. Bose begins to start seeing some reality in our country. With all these words, I would like to thank you, and thank you very much for your patience in listening to me at the time of COVID. Follow the lockdown. I have been in self-isolation for 1 month and I'm still doing well. The lockdown favors me, I think. Very, very pleased to talk to all of you today, and all of us should stay safe, get well soon, and get into the point of seriously thinking about what we can do in the education and the science sectors. Thank you very much. Jai Hind.